speaking to you from beautiful Philadelphia. Let's talk about what is in a story that is not in a story. One of the big challenges of writing is to get past the problem of over-explaining, of bogging down the story with having to tell all the backstory, all the reasons why things are the way they are, why the characters do the things they do, why what happens in the story happens. And so what we do when we write is we don't show everything. So it becomes a game, a challenge of some things being concealed from the reader and some things being revealed. So it becomes an art form of limiting what we reveal to the reader and letting their subconscious fill in all the blanks, make up for what isn't explained. Let's take a look at this situation strictly from the writer's point of view. You're writing a story, and not only do you need to anticipate what that story is going to be like for the reader, to anticipate, will they enjoy this part of the story, will they find this part of the story funny, that sort of thing, but we also need to anticipate what the reader does not know. And this is a real challenge. Me personally, one thing I'll do is I'll work on a chapter and then I'll put that chapter away. I won't look at it for months and months. And when I go back and look at it again, all of a sudden I realize that my knowledge of the story, I knew something that I did not put in, and without some indication of that knowledge that me as the writer knew about the story hardly makes as much sense as it could, hardly has as much impact as it could, because I left it out. I knew, I had the information, and just because I couldn't get out of my own head, just because I couldn't remember to forget what I was not putting in the story, I left that out. But when you hear the advice, know your audience, basically this is talking about writers should develop an imaginary audience, that as they write, in our subconscious and a little bit in our conscious mind, we have in mind who we're writing for, and we're imagining them reading what we're actually writing as we write it. Humans actually have a built-in capacity for this sort of thing, because it's what we use all the time in society. When we're talking to people in our subconscious, we are anticipating what our communications seem like on the other side. And this is an essential part of interacting. So a great deal of our subconscious is devoted to imagining our audience. So if you've ever heard someone, usually at least partially joking, "I'm not a mind reader," to someone else, they're saying basically, "I don't know what you're thinking," or that sort of thing. And yes, it's true, we can't actually get into the minds of other people, but we do. One of the reasons we have imagination is that we are very good at imagining what others are feeling and thinking. One of the big limitations of anticipating how our audience is enjoying our stories is that we have a hard time forgetting what we know about the story. We have a hard time getting outside of the story enough to appreciate what it is going to read like to someone who has no previous knowledge of the story. We've thought about this story, we've meditated upon it, and we know it so well that we can't see it with fresh eyes. We can't see it with virgin eyes. We can't see it as if seeing it for the first time. What can we do to compensate for this? I'm not going to go and look for it, but I was reading about Philip Roth, a great writer, and I'll give you a basic idea of what he was describing, that his developing a story so much had to do with what he took out. Every time he went back, he would go and take out. And when I read about this, I was like, that makes sense. What you can do is you can go ahead and work with the whole world of the story you're writing. Just write it and 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 write it. And then when you go back, you can then you can work on figuring out what the reader does not need to know, meaning what the reader is able to figure out on their own. And also, let's ask ourselves, well, why do we need the reader to figure out what is happening? Because if you explain everything, it's like explaining the joke. It takes all the fun out of it. And because we as humans are so good at detective work, because that's so much what we do, we go grocery shopping. What do? We go and search for the turmeric spice that we never bought before, and it's a detective work. We are detectives all the time, and when we go to read a story, we enjoy it more if we get to be more like detectives. And also, if you explain everything, it bogs the story down, it slows it down. It's like a piece of software that is needlessly 10 times as resource hungry as it needs to be. It takes the fun out of it. It does not add to the story. It takes away from it. If we want our readers to use their own imagination, then the story is going to be that much better if you allow them to imagine up their own versions of your story. Think about how much your real life is unexplained. Of course it's unexplained. There's no one there to explain it for you. When you're walking down the street and you see the couple passing you who are arguing, no one is there to explain to you that what happened was he backed up over her cat when he was backing up out of the driveway, and that is the reason for their argument. And so every situation you're in, you're not going to get a backstory, and this is real life, and this is the environment our brains are conditioned to. Another useful thing to contemplate a lot is how much we allow the readers to make up their own story when they are reading our story. Go ahead and let them come up with their own explanations. If you look at David Lynch films like Eraserhead, that movie does not explain at all who the woman with these cloud-like formations on her cheeks, who she is. And the thing is that all the evidence presented in Eraserhead, the movie, ignited at least my imagination, and I got enough evidence to come up with my own idea of what the story was about and put my own pieces together into a complete picture on my own. And that picture turned out to be it wasn't until years later that I read that the woman was actually like the woman inside the furnace. And I didn't need to know that. It was good enough that I could kind of make up my own version of that movie. But remember, we are in danger here if we don't put enough evidence in. The readers will not put a complete enough picture, and they will become bored with the story. It won't be compelling enough. There needs to be enough evidence to keep them captivated, to keep them interested. If they are continually putting the pieces together on their own, the story is working. One thing to keep in mind, here is show not tell, the great writing advice. And this is basically, instead of telling your audience that the protagonist is very, very sad, say your protagonist slumps over, tears drop down onto the newspaper. You're not explaining to your audience. You're just showing what they would see if they were standing next to your protagonist. And show not tell is this whole strategy of, you know what the story is about, and you're doling out bits of evidence so that your reader can make their own conclusions. I'll give you a quick example. Let's say that I'm writing a story and there's a character. I start out, here's what I write. Red is in a state of shock. He's staggering around, he bumps into a wall, he has to sit down. Unquote. When I go back, I can just take out Red is in a state of shock. All the rest of it is the evidence so that the reader can make that conclusion. That may not seem like that big of a deal, but when you start pruning a story like that, it makes it really tighten up and reads a lot better and is a lot more exciting to read. We have to be inside of the story. We have to mesmerize the story and know it. And at the same time, there's this element where we would be better at it if we could forget, somehow see the story as if we don't know it well. One thing you can do is implied narrative. While you're writing, you can think about writing in implied narrative. So whatever scene you're working on, whatever your characters are doing, whatever is happening, you can describe things that you think will imply the story. On a subconscious level, humans are very good at implied narrative. They have a master's degree in implied narrative, but it's all subconscious, so we don't think about it consciously. But have you ever met someone where their story doesn't ring true? That is where their implied narrative is not matching up with who they are presenting themselves to you as. And so subconsciously, we are Sherlock Holmes of implied narrative. Let's look at some of the implied narrative that you're looking at right now. These drawings behind me. Okay, they are not paper taken from the same tablet. What's the story behind the different quality of paper that are used in the drawings? Okay, I have a one-day-old stubble. Why? That implies that I shaved yesterday but not today. What is the history behind that? Okay, I'm bald. I always have I always cut my hair really short. Why is that? What is the implied narrative of that? Why is that all my t-shirts, most of them seem pretty well worn out? There's a lot of implied narrative there. There's a story there, just in that picture. You can, when you write a scene, it's a lot of the time it's like a snapshot, but in that snapshot, ask yourself, what story is implied? What evidence leads your readers to dream, to think to imagine the history behind that snapshot, to imagine what came before and what will go after. When you write a scene, think of it as at one point, just go ahead and take a snapshot of that scene and think about it. Do you have a character who's 8 months pregnant? Do you have a character who has mud on their boots? Do you have a character who's carrying a torch? This is all implied narrative that brings with it an implied storyline. Do you see where I'm getting at here? You can continue to know your story. You don't need to forget the inside scoop on your story while you're writing it. What you can do is you can write it with the strategy of an implied narrative, and in that way you can write a story that will be a better experience for people who have never read that story before. So it isn't just show, not tell. It's about, imagine yourself at a window, kind of like, a bank window, and you're doling out the evidence, and it's a game that you're playing with the reader. And then needed explanation. The whole problem with explaining the story in natural seeming ways. So, of course, you have the storyline where the protagonist is watching the news, and on the news it's basically explaining something that the reader needs to know is happening in the story. If you choose to have a narrator in the story, like in a lot of sci-fi films, basically the beginning that just has the narration explaining what the story is about, it has to do with the debris circling the earth and crew, and the drama involves the people who work at cleaning up that debris, and you have the narrator explaining the story before the story starts. For some stories, the best thing to do is to have a narrator step in and explain to the reader what's happening and quietly step out again, and the story starts running again. One thing that works very well when it works is when you're able to explain something to the reader and they don't even know that is what is happening. And that's where the scenes and the actions that take place in the story just naturally end up explaining some things the reader needs to know. If your protagonist is say, entering a training camp for the first time, that experience in that training camp is going to provide a lot of the explanatory things. Like in Ender's Game, it's a school, so in what happens in school, things are explained. So in a very natural way, the philosophy behind the story gets explained to the reader in a way where they're feeling like they are not having it explained to them. For me, I would try any and all of these strategies. Try putting a narrator in. Try having the narrator only in the story 5% of the time. Have the narrator in the story throughout the entire story, leading the reader by the hand. Don't have a narrator at all. It really depends on the story. It's sort of like whatever the nature of the story you're trying to tell will really determine what is going to work best. Remember, you are going to be your greatest teacher as a writer. So go out and with keeping in mind that every storyteller faces this same situation, search for the strategies other writers have used and look for new ones. They have not all been found. There are going to be, with every year that passes, there are going to be new strategies invented and discovering for show not tell, and it's up to you to go and search for them and try using them yourself. I hope this has been a contribution to your creative efforts. If you like my videos, please encourage me to make more. Hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe, tell a friend about them. The words of encouragement, the comments that people have left for me, I read them. I thank you very much. You are the driving force behind me making these videos. Those comments are the biggest reason that I continue to make these videos. Thank you. If you have time, please check out my storytelling at solomation.com, bizarre alternate reality fiction presented in episode form. Follow the misadventures of my protagonist Lily at solomation.com. I hope your writing and storytelling go great, and have a good day. I don't believe in external fate, but I do believe in internal fate. As an example, the fate of an automobile is that it will roll on wheels along a flat surface. The fate of a bomb is that it will explode. Do you see where I'm getting at? Your mental aptitudes will cause you to be interested in the kind of life you're going to lead. So if you're worried about whether or not you have what it takes to be a writer, the fact that you're worrying about that shows that your mental aptitude creates for you a kind of hunger for the creative life, and you don't need to worry about it. It is, if you didn't have the mental aptitude for the creative life, you wouldn't have the interest in being creative, in writing that book. So it is, we have in us, we are these different kind of mechanisms that determine the kind of lives we will eventually find ourselves leading. I mean, for me, I am profoundly uninterested in accounting, and I wouldn't be very good at it. There's no love lost there. I don't have the mental aptitude for accounting, and along with that, I don't have the interest in accounting. I leave that to people who find the subject fascinating.